Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Jeff Olson. I'm the Art Education Director for Royal Talents North America, and it is my pleasure to bring you, as a sponsor, another episode of the Invisible Museum live on Facebook. Oh, see, there we go. My name is Jeff Olson. Hold on. There's this other Jeff who exists out there in the ether who keeps kind of interrupting me at the beginning of the show. All right, so welcome back, everybody, to the Invisible Museum live on Facebook. So excited. It's been since April since we've been able to bring you the show, and really have a great subject today for you. I really would like to say my big thanks to everybody involved in the show. I think we're coming up on, what is it, our
9th?
Or am I jumping ahead there? Jenny, do you remember what our number show? This is episode
9.
9. So we're coming up on our 10th episode, and it's so exciting that we've been doing this now. And I just want to thank everybody involved and thank everybody who's been joining us each time. It's a true pleasure and true honor. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick intro, but my guest now needs no introduction, right? Zhenya is a prominent artist. Her artwork is featured in private and public collections across the globe. She's the recipient of numerous awards and accolades. She's a phenomenal historian and educator, as we have all learned in these past several months, with great insights and revelations that we've been able to share with her. That comes from, obviously, her entire lifetime dedicated to arts, but also a decade of working at the Goethe Museum, and the scholarly work that she has been able to do there with that great relationship. She's the co-founder of the nonprofit Project Ah and the founder of her own school, Z Academy. Hopefully you've been following her there. All sorts of exciting things there. I'm always amazed at what your students are coming up with. Just a great group of artists, and with your mentorship, really creating wonderful work. So please check that out if you haven't had that opportunity before. So I'm going to go ahead and jump out of the way. Although I do have one quick note here. We need to announce the winner from last time, right? So for those folks who joined us in April, we had you post an image on social media and tag us. And we have a winner, and his name is Steve O'Brien. Yay, Steve. So he's going to get a whole set of our Rembrandt assorted papers for oils, paper for watercolor, pastel, mixed media. A great value. And we're going to do that same prize again this week, but we're changing it up a little bit. We want to reward folks who are here today with us live. So what we'd like you to do is post an image of your favorite work on today's theme, which is walking, by any artist, and post it in today's comments. And then at the end of the show, we're going to pick a winner based on what comes up throughout. So please take some time to do that, and you'll be eligible to win the same prize as Steve did, which is all these wonderful Rembrandt papers. So with that said, I'm done. I'm out of here. Zhenya, it's all you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. Of course, this program would be totally impossible without your hosting. So thank you, Royal Talents North America, and everybody behind who are truly invisible, but are doing incredible work for us. And for everybody who's watching, welcome. I always go back and read all of your comments. I love seeing all the amazing places you've come from throughout the globe. So tell us where you're watching from. And today's subject is really unusual. It's so unusual that when I went to Google it to watch what other people have said about it, there's basically nothing on YouTube on walking in art. And it felt like curating an exhibition and experience. So I really am excited to share it with you. I'm always excited, but today extra. And I just want you to get you in the mood because, walking may not sound so glamorous at first, but I want you to imagine many artists, most artists I know love walks in nature, walks in solitude, walks throughout the city, walks with their family, walks with their dogs. And we see that throughout art. We see that reflected. And what if you could be on a walk with Rembrandt? Imagine if you're walking through Amsterdam, watching him take out his paper. What is he going to look at? What is he going to sketch? What are the thoughts? What are the inspirations? And I want you to think about, what would you ask Rembrandt? What would you talk about? What would be the profound or pedestrian talk during the conversation? And that's what we're doing. The title of our experience today is Walking Alongside the Masters. We're going to feel, we're going to know in a way what they thought on their walks. So that is my little introduction. With that, we're going to start sharing the PowerPoint. So give me just a second. And if you have any comments or questions, you could let us know throughout the time together. Okay, so let me bring that up. Slideshow from beginning. Okay. So let's just go and begin. So one of the greatest things that we've done as a human species is develop the ability for bipedalism, using two of our limbs and standing upright and navigating upright. And this took millions of years. What did we gain by doing this? Some would say that we gained using cell phones, and look at our terrible posture that we get from that. But I'm actually going to stress that we could debate about this the rest of the day, but the main gain, the main advantage of standing upright is actually freeing our hands. And you could see here, we are freeing them to carry the weapons, or a suitcase to work, or a cell phone to text our friends. But as an artist, as a creator, what I think is the most important, that we freed our hands to create. And no wonder that artists throughout time are going to gravitate towards this idea of standing upright, of moving through space. And what can you now do with your two paws that are free? So here's the painting. The painting trajectory begins, and we go back to Neolithic times, 6,000 years ago, and we already see on the cave paintings, this is near Spain. My honeymoon was in Barcelona, a sweet place to my heart. We already see these cave paintings portraying men and women walking in motion. This is very difficult to show, but unquestionable that this human being is moving, carrying something in his hands, as we had discussed. And the another biggest advantage of walking is that you get a companion. You get someone to walk with. We even have an expression, to walk through life together. And one of our oldest companions is, of course, a dog. If you have a dog at home, if you love dogs, the story goes way back. And walking side by side here, look at this incredible image of the friendship that's developed between these two individuals. I would call the dog individual. But in art history, in art, it takes a very long time to be able to express walking, especially in sculpture, due to the nature of the materials. So I'd like to talk a lot about the materials today. And if you consider sculpture made out of solid rock, if you carve it away, by the time you get to ankles and you want to show a freestanding person, they collapse. The sculpture is too heavy to carry its own weight. And therefore, we do get these images in early ancient Egypt. This is, 2,500 years BC. And we see the man and woman attempting to walk, but they're held back by the pedestal below them and the pedestal behind them that's adding an actual support. So again, the sculpture wouldn't collapse. What's very interesting here, we're going to talk about all kinds of metaphor for walking. We start with funerary art. This is a sculpture that's commemorating or presenting to the viewer a husband and wife. And we talked about a moment ago about walking through life together. They're going to continue walking through death together. You could see this kind of a side-by-side support, and that kind of love is immortal. The love does not stop. It keeps on propelling forward, and you could see their feet stepping forward away a little bit from the stone. This is as much as the sculptor is allowed to do in their material. But quickly, we move to 5. This is a quickest whirlpool through time, through history. So 500 BC, we are in Greece. And look, we get a negative space. We see through between the legs of this chorus, the young man that is sculpted here. Now, the one thing that jumps out to you probably before I even mention walking is that he's naked, or in art history, we say nude. So most of us don't set out walking nude, right? We generally have clothes, and so was the case in Greece. Not much has changed there. But this is again a funerary monument. And throughout history, we see that the soul is often shown as a naked body. You lose your clothes and you reveal your soul in the afterlife. In a way, you don't have to cover up after you're dead. You're pure, you're radiant with another dimension. And so here is very interesting. This athlete is commemorated, or this warrior is commemorated by the sense of walking. Why? If you stop, you're dead. The motion itself, walking is very interesting. It's not about where you started or where you're going to end up. It's the process. And that's very important for us to remember, the idea of process. As long as he's walking, he's immortal, right? He's a life thread is not going to stop in the afterlife. It's a very interesting metaphor here as well. And finally, we get to incredible artist whose name is Polykleitos. Polykleitos literally mean let's just go back for a second. Much renowned, it's a nickname, much renowned, was one of the most important Greek sculptors. And what he contributed to our understanding of walking is what we call in art history contrapposto. A contrapposto is simply shifting the weight. You see that one heel goes up and that sends the hip upward and repositions our shoulders so that they respond to that motion. We get beautiful S curves running throughout the body, makes a very elegant and beautiful pose. And I just want to get a little bit closer and show you it all starts from the heel, where the heel pushes up and it propels, it begins the motion of the body. And that's where our history is going to begin. This is our short introduction. Because some of you may not know, I might have shared this before, but I have a huge passion for tango. We may say that tango is started from just lifting that heel. I know my amazing teacher, Daniel Arias, is watching this morning. So this is cheers to you. You always teach me to lift my heel off the floor. And you could see that started long ago. All right. Just a nice quote from Polykleitos. He says, perfection comes about little by little. In Greek, you would say paramikron, through many numbers, right? Micro steps to lift that heel. And now we begin our journey. This was a little introduction. One of my favorite painters of all times, Pieter Bruegel the Elder. He was Flemish. He lived in what we would call modern day, mostly Belgium, in 1500s, in the height of the Renaissance. And here I just want to attract you. This is a self-portrait. It's a sketch in ink on paper. And we see the artist. We see a self-portrait. He's disheveled, wearing his master's hat, holding his tool in his hand. We don't see what he's painting. That's outside of our view. And who is next to him? Jeff, can you guess by the look of this drawing who that might be?
I'm going to guess his son.
So it could be his son, or somebody who's observing and learning his craft. And if we look a little bit closer, there's two interesting clues. I wonder if our viewers are guessing as well. If you do have a guess, please type it. I'm just going to attract your attention to the glasses. The artist does not need the glasses. He has these long eyebrows. His penetrating gaze erupts from there, observing, attacking his canvas. I always tell my students that Huh?
This is the banker.
You're right. You guessed it. You guessed it. Yeah. So there's the glasses, and then there is the. Actually, if we look below, he reaches in with his hand into his pocket. I'm going to show with my cursor. I think you'll be able to see it. He reaches into his pocket, so he's reaching for the money. So Bruegel, who had amazing sense of humor, that's how I wanted to introduce him to you. Paints not the artist and his collector. Right, the artist and the banker, the artist, the creativity, and then the funding. Right, those two are inseparable. And Bruegel was painting in a time where art was extremely serious, and he introduced humor, which we so appreciate. The sense of parable, the sense of storytelling, fables, if you will, in art. And there's always kind of a moral story, but has many different levels, and he's able, like the greatest artist, not to just laugh at you or us, but himself, at himself included, all of us as human beings. He was known because he was gravitating towards painting the lower classes, the peasants, somebody who was not elevated to the status deserving of a full representation, as Bruegel the peasant. That was his nickname, actually. So here we come to one of his most famous paintings. I probably everybody who's watching today had seen it at one point or another. If you've seen it, say yay, give a shout out. If you've seen it in person, in reproduction, if it's hanging as a magnet on your refrigerator, was in a textbook, give us a shout out on Facebook, please. I should say, give Bruegel the peasant, a shout out. So this was painted towards the end of his life, I believe just a year before he died. He was getting very profound and very esoteric in his images, full of messages. And he only has about 40 paintings that remained from his oeuvre, and about 12 of them hang in Vienna in a beautiful museum that I adore. So if you want to see Bruegel in person, I highly recommend traveling to Vienna. This is also in an amazing museum, Museo di Capi di Monte in Naples. If you've been to this museum, the most amazing Caravaggios and Bosch hang in that museum as well. I want to take you closer to this painting. And now I'd like you to think about, I'm going to start with Jeff, but I'd love to hear what our viewers are seeing. What is striking you about this image? Obviously, you may have seen it before. You may even be familiar with the subject matter. But if you look at it fresh, what are some of the things that just strike you that maybe you haven't noticed before, or seeing now, or becoming obvious here? And I'm going to start with Jeff while you are typing your comments.
Sure. Looking at this painting anew, I think one of the things that jumps out at me is how the composition supports the subject matter. He's got the angle of these folks kind of coming downhill, so from the top left to the bottom right, and it kind of helps exaggerate this visual effect of them falling down, right? So he does something fun with the composition. I've been looking at composition a lot lately in my own work, and this really struck me right away, the wonderful angles that he includes to help support what he's saying in the subject.
I couldn't agree more with you, Jeff. And it's very interesting, if we piggyback right on what you said, how he moves us at an angle, right? It's not one way. It's not just the way that he's enlarging the figures and taking us from the upper left corner to the bottom right corner, but there are ways that each figure is relating to each other. So if you actually go and look at their hands, how one hand may be holding something that another person is holding, and then we see one person touching the shoulder and the following person touching the shoulder, and the stick pointing toward another person. So if you concentrate just how he literally weaves the composition of that diagonal, is really fascinating for artist and non-artist. I wonder if we have interesting comments from our thread.
All right. Mark Fuller's first person, this is from Michael Fuller, sorry. First person looking back, all others looking up. That's interesting. Yeah. Their eyes, and this is something too that's so wonderful about this painting, right? So this is Heather Lowe commenting on the nature of each of their eyes. And I'll let you share the fun stuff about that, Zhenya.
Thank you. Thank you. So two very profound comments. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody who's written and thinking about this. So this idea that their eyes, right? And so we know, most of us know that this is a painting that's called The Blind Leading the Blind. But what's controversial here, though, when we look closer and we will look at the detail, and you could see that they have an affliction in their eyes. In fact, each one has a different kind of affliction. The the doctors love studying this painting for the purpose of disease and history of disease. But what's interesting, that they are still trying to look. So their faces are orienting. While the eyes might not be seeing, their faces are still receptive. So, and I think Michael is the one who said that one person is looking upward. So it takes us in different direction, considering even something that might lie beyond the painting. And I want to add to that, there's only one person that's turning towards us. And here this becomes even more apparent in this image, this blind, gouged out eyes, face, staring straight at the viewer. That's making us extremely uncomfortable, because what is a painting? It is a definition of a viewer absorbing the image that the artist had seen and presenting. We're exchanging the gaze between the artist and the viewer. And here we are returned with blindness, with a stare into our soul, with the gouged out eyes. Incredibly psychologically potent, right? But what's interesting, that this painting is taken from a biblical parable. So I'd like to turn to the Bible for a moment, because, and this is a little close up here again, which comes from the Gospel of Matthew. And it says, "Let them alone. They be blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch." So when we consider the text that Bruegel is quoting visually in his work, we have idea of religion, of being blind, of blind leaders leading the blind, us following blindly, and the result, we will fall into the ditch, which is what Jeff was noticing, where the painting is leading us. But things are not so simple when we look at Bruegel. Artists are never linear, they're never flat, they have many spins of what may be written and how they interpret it. So first, I just wanted to quickly attract your attention to the detail, and we do have religious symbols here. We have the cross on one of the blind man's chest, and we have the beads of a monk, or of meditation beads, religious beads that would help us pray, right? So we already see that there are symbols here that are pointing to a religious status. There's also a church, or a couple of churches in the distance, that set the presence to this painting. But what is the question that I wanted to ask you is, who is blind here? Is it the subjects who are blind? Or is it the world that is blind to the subjects? When I was a little girl, I always looked at this painting with great compassion. Never in the world it would cross my mind to be sarcastic about the main characters, or to think that they failed. I always thought, I am the one who failed, or the society is the one who failed to notice and to help them, and that they're falling into the ditch because of their misery. So in a way, Bruegel may be saying, oh, this is what happens when the blind man leading the blind, we will fall into the ditch. Or are we blind to the suffering of others? Are we the ones blind? Not the blind man who was looking at us, but we are the one like that, right? Or the viewer who is missing the point, right? So very interesting. I wonder if anybody else felt that there is a spin here and not so straightforward. Now, what's also fascinating is when other artists look at art throughout history. We have mentioned Charles Baudelaire in our nude tour when we were talking. I hope that you go back and watch that if you haven't yet. The history of the nude, of female nudity in art. And Charles Baudelaire, who was an amazing poet, wrote a poem by looking at the very same image that we're looking at today. So with your permission, I will share the poem. That okay, Jeff?
Absolutely.
And now I'd love to you recall the image, look at the detail, and listen to the words. Consider them, my soul, they are a fright, like mannequins, vaguely ridiculous, peculiar, terrible somnambulists, beaming, who can say where, the eyes of night. These orbs, in which a spark is never seen, as if in looking far and wide stay raised on high. They never seem to cast their gaze down to the street, head hung as in a dream. Thus they traverse the blackness of their days, kin to the silence of eternity, O city, while you laugh and roar and play. Mad with your lust to point of cruelty, look at me dragging days more than their kind. What in the skies can these men hope to find? What do you think, Jeff?
It's a beautiful poem. I'm thinking about your question about the meaning or possible meanings of the painting, and I do think it's important the context of the time when he painted this, right? This was the Reformation.
Yes.
And so we have a battle between two philosophies of religion, the Catholic Church and the new Protestant faith. And so, there's definitely, I think, some of that in here, right?
You absolutely right. In fact, he did a series of drawings which he asked before his death to be burned because he was worried that they were so full of religious controversy that it may cause a penalty to his wife, to his family. He wasn't worried about his own reputation at that point, but he was actually worried about his family. So definitely a tension between how you think of religion, where you stand, where is the human being in relationship to religion, where's the compassion, right? What's important, the church or the person? So many subjects that can be seen here. Yeah. Do we have any comments or questions from our audience?
Well, there's one from William here. He's seen a metaphorical progression of the fall in this. I think that's very interesting, right?
Yes.
The clothes of the people are painted in every detail while the faces are blurry. Does it carry any significance? Possibly, yeah. Although there's quite detail in their eyes. And as you were mentioning earlier, how each one represents a different affliction. So
what's so interesting is that even though the clothes are painting in such detail, and there's no mistake that these are almost medieval because these are very poor people, so they're kind of carrying almost medieval, simple clothes, right? There's a not fancy Renaissance court painting, right?
No.
And yet, we are able to forget that they're set 500 years ago, and we can bring them, even though we said let's consider the context, we can bring them in a political, religious, and non-political, non-religious context, just human discussion about the blindness, our emotional blindness, right? Think about all the debates that go on our television and let alone Facebook, right? People unfriending each other left and right because each side thinks the other blind, right? In the argument. So this is very interesting. Even though the detail in the clothing, I think we almost can forget. And that's why Baudelaire is able to identify. He says, even though you look so poor and blind, I may be even worse at this. I might be even in a worse situation than you. He's putting himself into those shoes. Now, interesting, the poem ends with this idea, what in the skies can these men hope to find? And I want to stress on the idea of hope. Is there hope within this painting? And I found an answer, at least to myself, that I wanted to share. In all my life, my long 200 years of life, I've never seen this detail. So I want to take you and attract your attention back to our blind man about to stumble, looking at us to the right. Can you notice what's to the right of him? What is that, Jeff?
There's a flower there.
You're right. And it's a particular kind of flower.
Yeah.
I hope our viewers can already recognize this is a white iris. And those of you who watched one of our first Invisible Museum tours on Van Gogh and the irises, I hope if you haven't, please go watch it. You will recognize that this is an exact white iris species. And it attracted my attention. The composition is almost identical. I didn't put a slide, but that diagonality, that movement, in Bruegel, we're moving from left to right. In Van Gogh, we're moving right to left. But that diagonal quality towards the hope. And I started researching white iris, and its symbol is long related to the idea of hope. So coincidence or on purpose, the very last thing that we see before we stumble out of the painting is a white iris greeting us in Bruegel's vision. Perhaps that glimmer of hope, as we also have discussed with potential in Van Gogh's painting. Very interesting how these two talk to each other through time. All right, with that too much introduction, Rembrandt. And again, we had a whole dedicated program to Rembrandt. You can go back and watch that as well. He's my absolute favorite artist. I promised to Jeff I'll try to stay within an hour today. So at some point you're gonna have to like put a like an Oscar, start playing music because I could talk on and on about Rembrandt. So instead of introducing him too long, I just want to tell you that like Bruegel, he's got one of the greatest sense of humors. And you see in this last self-portrait, one of the last self-portraits that he creates, before he dies, he's actually not even smiling. He is laughing. He's old and wrinkled and bowed down by his life and desperation and losing his loved ones, and he's still laughing. Some say there's a strange figure next to him, that he's almost laughing in the face of death that he feels in front of him. But what was going on in his household, and how did he get inspired to make his works of art? I want you to picture this man a few years back in his very wealthy mansion in the great quarters of Amsterdam, and he was busy. He had about dozens of students in his studio. Some of them lived in the studio with him. There were many children being born. Saskia's children did not live long, so there was nurses birthing and death, and little babies running around who are still alive, and nurses trying to teach them how to walk. All this commotion and combustion. And while he's trying to paint his greatest masterpieces and teach his students, in the middle of this, there's all this hustle and bustle of the house that's happening simultaneously in the shared space. So this is one of my absolute favorite drawings, and I just want you to look at it closer. It's so free. It's so, when you think of the master Rembrandt, and here he's letting go of precision. He's almost painted like a blind person, right? He's painting by feeling rather than form. And what do we see here, Jeff?
Well, it looks like a group of family members, but specifically you can tell it looks like two older siblings holding up and helping a young child to walk, maybe just under a year old, right? Just starting to get their feet under them.
Exactly. You absolutely correct. And we are actually invited, like that child, to learn to walk with him, because look, he starts where we are in a way, at the edge of the paper, and we kind of feel being held up, his weight, he's not sure. He's about to take his first steps. So walking. Why is walking important to Rembrandt? Why is he sketching this? Beyond the fact that he's probably looking at his young son, Titus, who he adored, who's taking his first steps. And so while he's doing his important commissions, he's also smiling and kind of feeling proud that his son is learning to walk. That's a big, literally milestone. In the meantime, why is this important? Now, here we have a self-portrait in the etching a technique where Rembrandt is drawing. And notice how he's looking up away from his paper, penetrating his subject. We feel like we're the psychologist's office and we are being like, or lawyer's office or judge. We're being penetrated through by that gaze. Now, for Rembrandt and many artists throughout history, drawing was the foundation of all arts. Learning to draw was a parallel or a metaphor like learning to walk. If you can walk, you can run. If you can run, you can compete, right? The same thing here. If you can draw, and here he is drawing on his paper presented to you in the act of drawing. If you can draw, the world is yours. You are the artist who's independent, who can have imagination spill out on their works of art. Now, like when we take our first steps, and in tango, in dancing as well, the first thing our teacher says is don't look at your feet, look up. And it's really hard to trust that your feet will place in a place you want it to go, right? So you think you're going to stumble. And it's taking a long time to trust, to coordinate the sense of movement with not looking. The same idea is present here. Instead of looking at his art, Rembrandt is not looking there. As I said, he's penetrating the subject. So there's a great metaphor here for walking and drawing. And I want to show you another. Here he's really grueling us. I mean, even through the screen, I can get goosebumps. Look at that. Trusting his hand. Do you notice how he's almost moving freely while his gaze is static?
Yeah.
And here's another incredible image. It's a drawing this time from British Museum. And this is probably one of my favorite drawings of all times. Here is another child learning to walk. And here I want you to see this red chalk reduced to, you can probably count 30 lines and this drawing is done. It's the essence of showing the ability to walk and the way that the women are crouching down to the level of the child's weight sinking into the arms and propelling forward, right? Looking ahead. Again, I believe that for Rembrandt, it is the metaphor of the truth of the core of the artist, taking your first independent steps. Anything you'd like to add, Jeff, here?
It is a marvelous drawing, isn't it? The economy of it, the line, both of these drawings are just exceptional examples of Rembrandt's ability to capture emotion so quickly with just the use of a line.
Right. And if any of you are artists who are watching, or if you've never drawn, if there's one drawing you want to try to emulate, just take a pencil or a pen, or if you have red chalk, and try to draw this, because here you don't have to, like Jeff said, economy of means. There are no eyes or noses here. It's simply the gesture, the energetic line that flows from one person to the other. And if you try to just give that expression on paper, it's a joy to draw this way. So I highly encourage, especially if you win that beautiful paper today, try this drawing. It's really rewarding. I make all of my students draw this at least once. From the smiling Rembrandt to grumpy Goya. This is not a self-portrait. This is a portrait by another artist, Portana. I just really loved it because it shows perhaps a little bit less bias of what the artists look like, because of course, when we make self-portraits, it's a concept of ourselves, right, that we want to present. And here we see this old man, and we will look at his face, a man who he was so famous for painting portraits at the Spanish court, who had seen one too many things, heard one too many gossips. And we really see this aging cynic. It's not so much somebody so more lighthearted like Rembrandt in terms of his sarcasm, right? This much heavier personality. And the other reason that I wanted to show you, by the way, it says in the background that this is made as a gift by another artist to Goya from his friend. But another reason is because we see Goya's palette. And as someone who loves painting in oils, I couldn't resist sharing this, and I know that Jeff would just get such a kick out of it. There is an art of how you lay out your colors on your palette, and some artists disagree, and they say this is the way. And this is so interesting because when we study Rembrandt's palette versus Velázquez's palette versus Monet's palette, so Cézanne's palette, there's going to be not just how it looks on their painting, but how the colors are actually laid out on it. And here we see from light to dark, from white to black, yellows and ochres and browns, and then goes into the blues, and how he's pulling out his paints to mix in the middle. So this is a little inspiration. It's early in the morning for us in Los Angeles. So if you are in my time zone, perhaps this is like a little dose of inspiration. If it's afternoon or evening, go grab your paints and lay out your colors. Isn't that delicious?
Miraculously, the red appears.
Right. Out of place, right? Okay, so from that, we're going from the color world to the black and white world of Goya. He was very famous for his paintings, but here I concentrate on his ink wash. And this is the most favorite drawings I've ever seen in my life. It resides at the Getty Museum. I had seen it many times without glass, as you can make an appointment to, as a scholar, to go see these drawings in the study room, and you could be like an inch away. They even give you a pencil to take notes right in the presence of the masters. Incredible experience. The title of this work of art is not by art historians, by Goya himself. He did a series of these drawings and I believe close to the end of his life, and he titled them. It's almost like a book with ideas. So here at the bottom in Spanish, it says, and I translate to English, he can no longer at the age of 98. And I always wanted to retitle this drawing or add to Goya, he can no longer at the age of 98, but he's still trying. Right? No longer can, but he's still trying. So what this man is doing, the age of 98, he has lived a long life that had bowed him down and changed his skeleton system to not be able to stand upright. He's still trying to walk, that bipedalism that we talked about. And what's genius about this drawing, if you take your fingers and just cover up the man and just kind of squint with one eye, if you could try to do that, Jeff, you'll see that only about 90% of this drawing only about 10% of this drawing is drawn. 90% of this drawing is blank paper. But it's no longer blank paper. The way, talk about composition, the way that Goya placed this blurb of a person on the page, he's turned the flat paper into deep space. And it gives us an illusion without even drawing, just by his composition, right? That he has walked all that way from the upper corner all the way down and has about 1 inch to go before he dies, right? It's almost like a metaphor of life. These are the words I wanted to share with you what Goya was saying about his art. And he says the act of painting is about one heart telling another heart where he found salvation. So this great compassion, I think this is one of the most compassionate images in the history of art. He also says, I see only forms that are lit up and forms that are not. There's only light and shadow. My eye never catches lines or details. I think this is one of the best advice to all artists across times. So he's trying to draw, but his eye never catches lines or details. How does it translate to what we see here on the right? Do you see how when we look at the man's face, there's no outlines? There's no details of the nostrils, of the eyelashes, or the fingernails, or the wrinkles. It's all, what is it? It's forms of light and shadow. Isn't that beautiful, Jeff?
It is. And I liked that you pointed out all the negative space in there. I was really impacted by that too, not just this idea of a metaphorical journey, but also just the weight that it adds to his shoulders. It makes it feel like he's really holding up the universe on his shoulders, and it adds to that sense of him being pushed down and fighting against it with all he's got. So I really like the placement of the figure, and he does a wonderful job of this, right? All of his etchings and drawings like this use the paper in strategic ways, and it's wonderful to study.
What you've described is so profound. And yet, when we think about how long it took him to draw it, probably 10 minutes, right? So
Right.
that's amazing that you can capture that philosophical idea of space, of carrying the weight of the world by being a quick study of light and dark, right? And as we complete our quotes here, he says, I have had three masters, Nature's, Velázquez, and Rembrandt. So I thought it was nice because we had just seen these images by Rembrandt and nod, right? To remember that looseness and that expression that we talked about. This is what he's saying. Nature and Rembrandt, you don't need anything else. Well, maybe Velázquez in between.
He really is an heir to Rembrandt, isn't he? His style, his technique, and
Yes,
how
and
he helped to define
and
the
he's
language.
also his psychological
Mhm.
depth, right?
Yeah.
By the way, I'm pretty sure that next Invisible Museum tour will concentrate on a journey with Goya, especially his late work, which was so mystical and metaphysical, and getting inside his haunted images. So get ready for that. Skipping to Germany, one of the most famous painters of his time in romantic period in 18th century, Caspar David Friedrich. Now, this is another portrait by another artist, an artist painting an artist. And if I could get a photograph or a person even better, I would have him there introducing himself. But I thought this painting would just do that brooding, intense fellow. I'm not sure I want to go on a walk with him. This is made by von Kuglen, looking at Friedrich. And Friedrich was fascinated not just with the walking, but with nature. So, what does walking gives an artist by being in nature? And talk about metaphysical. He felt that nature was filled with symbols, riddles, and messages. Just like Bruegel is going towards the Bible to get a message that he's going to translate. Uh, Caspar David Friedrich felt that he didn't need religious texts. He felt religion was written within the landscape, and all he had to do is quote the landscape to get you closer to divine experience. This is a self-portrait by Friedrich, so you can compare what he what he was shown by another artist, what he thought he looked like himself, a little bit younger here. And just to give you a setting of his biography, because perhaps you know a little bit less about him than Rembrandt, his father was very religious, very strict. You could tell by what his father's occupations were. He was candle maker and soap pourer. So washing, being clean, and keeping the light in the home, right? And his mother died when he was 7. And perhaps the most dramatic episode is that he went ice skating with his brothers, and one of his brothers, some say trying in attempt to save Friedrich himself, had drowned in the ice in front of his eyes. And this gave him probably most likely a kind of a fear and awe of the fierceness of nature, the way that it could take you away at any moment. So it's beauty, it's fun that you could skate on the ice, but at the same time it could swallow you at any point. And so this is a kind of a sense that we feel when we see all these images of solitude, usually of solitude or two men, or a man and a woman, still they feel as if in isolation from the rest of the world, from the cities, from the bustle of the cities, surrounded by the grandiose feeling of nature. He
Zhenya, can
was.
I ask you a
Mhm,
question?
mhm.
And maybe you've compared this already, but it reminds me a lot of an artist we talked about earlier in the year, Albrecht Dürer, another
Yes.
German artist. This portrait looks a lot like Dürer's self-portrait as a young man, especially the position of the face and the eyes. I bet you anything Friedrich had studied that image. And I would love to see these two side by side just the
That's
shape of
that.
his eyes and his direction of his glance, and the same kind of questioning is in his face. And I'm sure that obviously Friedrich was aware of him, and as all German artists at the time idolized Dürer, but it
You
is
you you
definitely
are you
not.
so right, and I wonder if we can do like a post follow up and do a little post on
Yeah, we'll
Royal
have to post
Talents
them together and show
and
them
ask
side by
what people
side.
think about that pairing. You know what our audience thinks. So we'd love to follow up with that. And feel free to interrupt me. That's always love hearing all your ideas. So that was great. So here, I just wanted to say that he loved going to walk before the sunrise. And you probably noticed that there's this presence of the night that is about um, to lift, or this transition. It's actually called the walk at dusk, right? So this transition between either the evening and night or night and day. He always was fascinated with that fleeting moment. Not that and not that yet also, right? That transition between light and dark. So I want you to remember that as we look at this image. And I wanted to hear from Friedrich himself. So he says, I must stay alone and know that I'm alone to contemplate and feel nature in full. I have to surrender myself to what encircles me. I have to merge with my clouds and rocks in order to be what I am. I want you to look at this painting. We will look at close up in a moment, but feel that sense. There is a person walking there, but they almost dissolve. We forget about them. They almost invite us into the painting to merge with the sensation of becoming one with the rocks and the clouds. A beautiful quote. And he also says, close your bodily eye. Talk about blindness, right? Close your eyes. Don't look at art. Don't look at nature. That you may see your picture first with the eye of the Spirit. Then bring to light what you have seen in the darkness, that its effect may work back from without to within. So interestingly, for an artist to say, close your eyes. Remember Rembrandt peering through and looking at us? He's saying the opposite. Go in nature, and going in nature is like go into art. Go inside my painting and close your eyes. And then see from within, and then open them again and share it with others. So I want to make a little experiment. If we can just take 5 seconds to look at this painting together. I'm bringing you a close-up. Then close your eyes. I'm going to close it. I'm going to ask Jeff to close his eyes and all of our viewers. And for just 5 seconds to look at this painting from within your soul, starting now. And then I want you to open your eyes again and look at it from the eyes from within your soul. And please share with us, what is it that strikes you the moment you opened your eyes? So please type away. I know it's going to take a moment. And I'm going to start always with Jeff. What is it that strikes him?
Yeah, the figure kind of disappears for me. It's the rock and how it almost appears to be floating, weightless, as opposed to resting on those stones below it. It's like logically, you know that it must be, but like you said, in your mind's eye, it seems to drift almost weightless, as if it's on a journey upward.
Incredible, incredible. I agree with you. There's a kind of sense of levitation, of mystery that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Anything from our viewers? I know it takes a moment to type, and we can always come back to it.
We've got other people are also mentioning the rocks and the structure of the rocks. Claire makes an interesting comment. It reminds her of ancient Irish burials.
That is so, if I
Lunar
just stop there
eclipse.
for just a quick moment, you're so precise, Claire, because Friedrich was obsessed with monuments, death monuments, and death itself, and the marker as almost like a tombstone, not as a final destination, but as a gate to another world. So very interesting comment from you.
Jules is mentioning how the branches seem to sprout out from it. So yeah, lots of good Good comments. There's
None of
more
us,
movement in the background.
I didn't mention it because I didn't want to steal it, but none of us yet mentioned something in the sky.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, somebody does. So we've got Levi here who has a question mark, lunar eclipse.
Right. So this idea of a phenomenon beyond our eyes, the philosopher in this painting, it looks like a philosopher, right? A historical figure in his German traditional garb with that huge hat is not looking up. He's doing what I asked you to do, closing the eyes. He's looking at that phenomenon in the sky from within his soul. He's right below it. Whether it's a lunar eclipse or a new moon with the Venus right next to it, right? There's actually a star there as well, symbolizing birth and rebirth, a cycle of nature, a cycle of our life. Incredible. All right. So what else did Caspar David Friedrich say? Just as the pious man prays without speaking a word, and look at that man, prays without speaking a word, and the Almighty hearkens unto him, so the artist with the true feelings paints, and the sensitive man understands and recognizes. So I wanted to throw this back at the audience because Friedrich is thinking about his painting almost like a prayer, but the prayer not to God, a prayer to his viewers. And by you commenting and connecting, you were the sensitive man or woman who he's talking about, who understood and recognized his prayer through his art, right? Through our connection. He says the feelings of another person should never be imposed upon us as a law. God, that's a great manifesto for any politician or any times, right? And also for artists and teachers and art historians. What I say to you should not be coloring the way you think. My feelings should not be determining because I'm leading the store or Jeff's. Your comment is leading us together as much and has as much weight. So that's a wonderful sentence. And he says the painter should paint not only what he has in front of him, but also what he sees inside himself. If he sees nothing within, then he should stop painting what is in front of him. And that's another way of saying if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it, right? Don't say I'm a painter or I have this job or whatever that might be. Even retail, you're coming in the store. If you don't have something nice or profound or interesting to share, don't do it. Right? Don't come from an empty place. Feel yourself and then reach out to people. I thought it was a very interesting comment. And very quickly, he did a series of these walks. This is one of the versions. And often they're shown from behind, from the back. There's actually even a German term for that, which I probably have it in my notes somewhere. But I forget right now what it's called. If we have any German-speaking person, there's a German term of introducing the character from their back. And what it does, here we could see that moon again and the star. What it does, it affords us to look beyond the painting, not just in the front of the painting, not just at the entry point, but look through it, looking beyond, not looking at an image, looking through an image to beyond, right? Very interesting concept. So picking up the speed here, perfectly perfect with Gustave Caillebotte, who is painting during Impressionist time in Paris. This is actually in a time where we can have a photograph. So this is an anonymous photographer taking his picture from a private collection. If you own this picture and want to share your name, we're happy to meet you if you're watching this tour. Caillebotte was an incredible artist, but before he was an artist, I wonder if you've heard of his name. Let us know if you've heard of Gustave Caillebotte. He's painting during the time of Manet and Renoir and Degas. But the reason you probably heard less about him because he was a very wealthy aristocrat, and he was trained as an engineer first. Then he became a lawyer, got his license to become a lawyer. Then he was drafted to Franco-Prussian War. And then in his late 20s, he decided he wanted to learn how to become an artist. And in a few years, he became a magnificent artist. And by his mid-30s, he decided he wanted to garden and stop painting. So we have very little work by him. But he was very important because you'll see he contributed one of the most famous images during Impressionist time, and he collected Impressionists, supported them. Monet survived because of his support. So this is actually a self-portrait by the artist, and this is the image. And I, without hesitation, know you have seen this image because it's become the postcard of Paris, of Parisian experience. And this is by Caillebotte. It's a very large image. And he paints the sense of walking, but in a modern city. Nothing could be more different from Caspar David Friedrich contemplating that moon alone with levitating rocks. We can almost hear the city bustling here, the knocks of the carriages against the cobblestone, the drops, the water that's been spilled by the rain emerging from the asphalt and smelling that wet cobblestone. The umbrellas that are brushing away against each other as the passers pass each other on their way. A very different sense of walking. And I wanted to show you a little bit closer. Instead of a deep contemplative experience, this is modern sense of existence. You might as well add a cell phone into their hands. Nobody's looking at anybody else. Nobody's connecting, not even the couple to each other. Look at the frontal couple and how they're about to miss the person who's about to knock into them. There's not even enough space for them to move out of his way, right? They're ignoring each other. So this is this modern sense of walking in your own solitary way, disconnected from the rest of the city. Very interesting comment that he's making here. Amazing composition, the recessions of the buildings. Look at the, Jeff is going to love this. This is for anybody who loves abstraction. Look at that lantern, how he cuts it at the top. Right, it just fits and supports the painting, divides it in half and supports it, right, almost like a column in a religious building, right, in a temple. And so what we have, they say that Caillebotte was very interested in photography, but he's certainly using his intellect and his skills to work out this composition. So here we see the what it would look like without the people walking. Right, the buildings, the extreme perspective. And what I love are these little things. You see these little things?
Yeah, those are great.
This is the reserve. This is where the people will be. He puts this like abstract little spaceships, right? And then this. I'm on purpose took away the painting. Can you figure out, Jeff, by memory? Now, you don't have to be right. It's just curious how our mind works. What this curve would refer to?
It's the umbrella, right?
Looks like an umbrella, right? And you're very, very close. So let's look at how, and you see here how he draws beyond the frame. See how the buildings emerge past it and the lantern keeps going? And then he cut it with a little pencil line to create that cropping. So we see his mind at work here. And here's the painting. I on purpose show you how the drawing extends, right? And if I go back, it's the umbrella, but it's a little bit more than the umbrella. It's entire composition starting from the, oops, I'll go back for a second. Back is this way. Starting from the man on the left, climbing upward. You see, like, woo, creating this beautiful journey, that arc to travel throughout the painting. So you were right, and a little bit plus to add to that. Okay, so here is what this street would look like today. Nobody's walking, there's cars, no more cobblestones. So even that experience, which we thought as modern, is replaced by something else in our modern life. This is just a photograph taken in exact location a few years back. This is what this painting looks like in the museum. It's an incredible experience to walk up to it. You literally feel like you're walking inside a Parisian street, a total time traveling. And I wanted to close with his story as we keep going quickly to a few other images. by a quote from Kai Boat. Remember, he collected an enormous amount of Impressionists, and after his death, he left it to the French government in order to exhibit them. He was concerned that these paintings would be stored away to provincial museums because the government or the people would not be ready to understand the profundity of these paintings. And he wrote in his will, "I give to the French state the paintings which I have. Nevertheless, since I want that this donation be accepted, and in such a manner that the paintings go neither in the attic nor in the province museum, but well in the Luxembourg Museum and later in the Louvre Museum, it is necessary that a certain time passes before execution of this clause until the public, I do not say understand, but admit this new painting. This time may be 20 years at the maximum." So he's saying the public is maybe not ready, he dare say understand, but at least accept or admit these paintings. But that time when they'll love it is maybe at maximum 20 years away. So what a visionary he was, right? Talk about collectors, not just artists, but collectors. He was a genius at supporting the arts and seeing ahead of his time. Had to share this.
Interesting that this painting, as well as many of the other paintings, ended up in Chicago.
Right.
The Louvre.
Exactly. So we see that the executors felt that Paris at the time was not ready to exhibit. And exactly like you're saying, it ended up outside of the French collections. Now, Edvard Munch, his paintings. Now we're talking about a Norwegian. We have a really great collection across the world. Norwegian artist created an image that's probably the most iconic of 20th century. And we all know, it needs no introduction, that it's called the Scream. But did you realize, Jeff, that it's not really the scream, it's the walk?
Mm-hmm.
This man is walking almost like Goya's, right, coming to the edge of the painting. And it was during the walk that Munch had this autobiographical experience. He was on the bridge walking with his two friends, and he's described this. Let's look in his own words. Look at this. By the way, talking about the scream. Who is screaming is the question, because this character covering his ears, it's almost like he doesn't want to listen, right? So is he screaming with his open mouth, or is he more in awe of the scream that he's hearing? What is screaming? And this is the quote. "I was walking along the road with two friends. The sun was setting. Suddenly, the sky turned blood red." Look at that painting, right? Blood red. "I paused, feeling exhausted, and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire above the blue black fjord and the city. My friends walked on, and I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature." How do you feel, Jeff, about this painting and the quote?
Well, it's such an interesting subject matter for Munch. He's done so many paintings along this line. And of course, like you said, this one's so iconic. This idea of hearing a scream in nature is really profound to understand his psychology and his relationship with the land and with the city itself, because this is a very specific place that he's painted over and over again. There's a sister painting, if you will, to this called Anxiety that shows several people with this kind of estranged look on their faces as well. So this idea of his anxious relationship with the public and his home really permeates with me. I mean, he had a real struggle with his work as he grew older and its acceptance. A lot of his paintings deal with this kind of anxiety of being in a crowd or life in the modern world. And so, yeah, it really is a fascinating subject to bring up with Munch, this idea of The walk.
Right? Instead of the scream, the walk, right?
Yeah.
Retitling it for a moment. And that was such a beautiful response. I wonder if our viewers can share as well what they feel. But I want to return back after we read the quote, return back to this idea. What or who is screaming in this painting? Where is the noise coming from? And according to Munch, now that we hear his words, it's coming not from within him, but from nature itself, from those blood red clouds, from that moving on the bridge. Imagine resonating the sound. I'm going to take a sip of water for a second.
There are a couple comments. A lot of folks haven't heard this quote before in relationship to the painting, so it's really great for them to be able to see that and hear that together, because it does profoundly change your understanding of it.
Right? It's kind of, it really changes. Now, when we know that at the bottom of this fjord, there was a lunatic asylum where his sister was recently admitted to the mental institution, and him walking and seeing that in proximity, feeling that in proximity, we may say that it might have added to his hearing the nature scream, this mad scream. But also very interesting, we have somebody discovered in early 1900s, not when the painting was made, but a bit later, that up in the clouds, you see those red clouds that he describes in the sky, that there is a pencil mark, and the caption says, could only have been painted by a madman. So this is Munch commenting on his own work, almost looking as an outsider, not understanding how he himself had created it. So this little red mark, it's hidden. You see, it's really hard to see it. And it also adds, I wonder if anybody had heard this. I didn't know this until I started the research for our program. And it really kind of was interesting that there is a scream or message embedded into the nature, right? There's a message within that we might have missed unless we were a nose away in this painting. Very quickly, I want to introduce a photographer who was really changed how 20th century or late 19th century and then 20th century looked at motion. And that's very important to us. And his name was Etienne Jules Marie. He is credited as a forefather of cinema, and he invented chronophotography. And what chronophotography does, this is a chronophotographic gun. And don't be worried, it's absolutely safe. It's meant to capture 12 images per second on one image. And that results in a photograph that looks like this. An idea of sensing the movement, watching one second in all its permutation. And that really changed how painters looked at the work. I was going to look at Duchamp, Nude Descending the Staircase, but just because we don't have the time, I cut it out of the show. But I did have to share Giacomo Balla, who was an Italian futurist. And he looked, definitely Marie would have influenced him. And he paints, this is a wonderful, not just image, but wonderful title, Dinamismo di un cane al guinzaglio. So dynamism of a dog on a leash. And the reason I laugh is because futurists were really interested in the dynamism, movement of machinery. Think about a train approaching, right? Or early versions of flight, right? And he says, no, let's look at the dog on a leash and look at the dynamism that that little body, little tail of a dachshund creates. And one of my favorite details is just how he paints the movement of that leash. Absolutely amazing. Now, a little glimpse back in time. By the way, this is a great quote. This is from the artist, Balla, Giacomo Balla. Indeed, all things move, all things run, all things are rapidly changing. A profile, something that's thought as static in history, right? In art history. A profile is never motionless before our eyes, but it is constantly appears and disappears. On account of the persistency of an image upon the retina, moving objects constantly multiply themselves. Their form changes like rapid vibrations in their mad career. Thus, a running horse has not 4 legs, but 20, and their movements are triangular. So this is a new way to look at art, not as a static image and here's a profile of a dog, but it doesn't have 4 legs or 1 tail, but dozens of legs and dozens of tails. We see the movement rather than the static image. Very profound and reminds us where we started from. A man taking, I was going to say a man taking his dog on a walk, but sometimes it's the dog who takes his owner on the walk, right? Happens too.
Futurism is a great one for this too, the whole idea of dynamism. What is it's Umberto Boccioni's sculpture about a figure in space. I can't remember the title of the exact piece. I think it's Unique Forms in Space or something.
Correct.
Into that. Yeah, yeah, that's a great image of the futurist to this theme.
Absolutely incredible how an artist is trying not, remember if we think about this, the chorus, the Greek Praxiteles sculpture trying to step out, just showing that separating from stone. And now we've gone so far, this is why I put this juxtaposition of actually showing movement in a static painting. It was really incredible. Now, I'm going to fly through Giacometti just because the limit of our time, but those I could not put in a sculptor in this presentation because he was obsessed with the idea of a sculpture walking, but I'm going to skip it a little bit because of our time limitation. But you're going to get an advantage of seeing these beautiful slides. This is perhaps my most favorite drawing, even more than of one of Goya. I have to say 2 words about it. It's a man walking reduced to the core. Only a sculptor could have done this because a sculpture, bronze sculpture, clay sculpture begins by inserting the core inside. Like think about a support system through the body, right? A skeleton. And Giacometti reduced the sense of movements to, instead of Goya into 30 lines, now into maybe 10 lines. And yet we sense walking throughout paper, that no longer static image, a fantastic image of Giacometti leaning forward, walking, carrying his own sculpture.
Yeah, that's a great photograph.
And so much was his work important that I just wanted to point out that his images of walking men were added to the reverse of the 100 Swiss francs banknote. So walking itself made it from museums to our everyday money exchange, which we see daily, right? But what I wanted to end with is Andrew Wyeth. I wanted to come back to America, where I'm broadcasting from, and to 20th century artists. And here I've shown you either self-portraits, portraits, or photographs of the artists. Here I show you an unusual image from my own archives. This is Andrew Wyeth with Yelena Matusovskaya. Yelena Matusovskaya is an incredible poet and art historian who passed away when I was 4 years old. She is my aunt. My aunt from Russia, who was the first art historian to travel from Russia to America and got a special permission to get in touch with Andrew Wyeth because he was very known recluse. He hated interviews, and he allowed her because he was very curious. Who is this Soviet young girl who wants to know about his art, and how do they know in Russia about his art? And he allowed her to travel, and we have amazing archives of that experience. And she wrote a book that was published after her death. She died at 33 years old, but it really changed her life. It also somehow changed his life because he said, I will travel to Russia for my exhibition only if you are the curator of that exhibition. And when he learned that she passed away, he did not come. He kept his word. In this picture, he shows Lena. You see he's holding something in his hand. It's his first painting. He shows her his first work of art, where it all began. He was a very sickly child, and it was his father who was a famous illustrator who taught him how to paint. They said that he could paint beautifully or draw beautifully before he knew how to walk, which is funny for a tour, right? He learned to be a Rembrandt before he could walk. And he said, many wonderful quotes. We will end with one of them. But one of the things I love that he simply said, I paint my life. And he was known to stay and love nature, to go on long walks. And this is one of my favorite images by him, which reduces the idea of walking to just feet, not the entire body, right? And it's called trodden weed. And before we close, I have a little dessert and surprise for in a moment, but I wanted to look at this image. Talk about detail. He paints in egg tempera technique, caring for each blade of that grass that most people probably would not even stop to look at. Interestingly, it looks so realistic, but Andrew Wyeth thought that he was an abstract artist before he was a realist. And in this quote, he says that my people, my objects breathe in a different way. There's another core, an excitement that's definitely abstract. That all that realistic technique allows him to show the abstraction of our existence in nature. And I'm going to share with you my absolutely favorite quote. And I'd love to imagine those feet walking. And now listen to this. You know, you can be blind to a thing, even if you go to it again and again. You still don't see it. I suppose that is why I painted trodden weed. I had been ill, and one day walking across the field, looking at my feet, watching where I was walking, I became conscious of what we walk on. Sometimes you step on things that are just fantastic. I was then conscious of a few walks I have taken with people, supposedly very sensitive people. You might be walking with them in a spring landscape, and they'll say, "What a sky up there!" And then their great big feet come down and squash some beautiful spring flower or beautiful leaf. You ask yourself, are they really that sensitive? I've often wondered, at times, I don't consider myself sensitive at all because I miss so much. And I bring back the painting to you. And I'd love to hear from our audience any comments or questions about anything that we had said before I wrap it up with a little surprise, and also how it resonates with you, Jeffrey.
It is a wonderful image, isn't it? And his attention to detail is so exquisite. It's almost as if in that quote he's kind of counterbalancing this idea of the abstraction and the representational, and where true observation and feeling and understanding reside. It's really, really fascinating, isn't it?
Reducing. So in a way, if we think about it, all of our images were about looking beyond the painting up to the heavens and sky, bringing that divine presence, looking for inspiration. And he says, don't look out there. Look down below your feet, going from the macro to micro. And these little microbes, these little plants, those little tiny things, that's where the secret is, right? Is reversing. And not go towards the head and upward, not elevating brain above every other organ, right? Our bipedalism, but going below our feet. Any comments from our viewers before we wrap up?
Got to get your head out of the sky, I think he's saying, right?
Exactly.
People are thankful, as always, Zhenya, on the presentation. Let's see on the questions here. Butterfly tastes with its feet, and we can taste life better when we walk through it. That's from Jules. That's a great one, isn't it?
Beautiful.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah.
That deserves an award right there, I think.
Right there. Way to go, Jules. Perfect. Perfect.
While you're looking through these quotes, I'm just going to wrap up with the last slide, and then we can always go back or share them in a moment.
Please.
But I wanted to show you this image. And because you're always somebody I torture, Jeff, does it resonate? Do you recognize the artist?
I don't recognize the artist.
So here we have an image of a man walking, and the paint itself spilling over as if walking through paint itself. And the artist said, surprisingly, the eyes are not the main sensory organ for the achievement of painting. As if a visually impaired person, a painter feels their way through space of uncertainty into that of creation and illumination. What do you think, Jeff?
Oh, I would agree. I would agree. You mentioned Duchamp earlier. He's always talking about the tyranny of the visual, right?
Yes.
Our relationship with art, that we're so hung up on the visual that we don't think about the internal world. And you kind of talked about earlier too, the idea of accumulated experiences of seeing, when you were talking about Friedrich and closing your eyes, that the world is more than just a visual experience. It's an internal experience, and what we see externally often has a lot to do with our internal understanding of that vision.
So you passed the test. The artist is myself. That's why you didn't recognize. Zhenya Gershman.
I was sneaky.
I was so sneaky. I had to put that in because I really thought a lot. The reason that I chose this subject, I thought a lot about the idea of seeing and walking and a sense of artist and connection to the viewer and nature and metaphor. And so I wanted to wrap up of bringing us to every day. So if you have images also that you've drawn of people walking or images you love, please share them. Please tag us with Invisible Museum Tours and Royal Talents North America so we can share them and talk about it as well together. So any other thoughts that you've noticed there that we'd like to share?
He says, do you see the sort of face on his forward leg similar to Monk, or is it just my imagination? I think referring to your painting, Zhenya. That's from Joanne. There was an image of life of each master, their message, their soul. Thank you. My life extends through their work. That's from Sonia. What a great comment and compliment to you, Zhenya.
Beautiful.
I'm bringing this all together for sure. Franklin's talking back about the Wyeth and so much detail, especially in the minuscule. I remember I had an art instructor who used to say that you should be able to just drop a string in front of you and make a circle, and there's enough of interest to paint within that string.
Right, right.
Yeah,
It was there's an amazing thing. If you Google, I skipped Giacometti because as you could see, it took us an hour and a half. That was my attempt at fitting it into an hour. But if you Google Giacometti interview, there's an amazing documentary, 30 minutes or 20 minutes of him working and talking about his art. And he also says that don't give me a landscape, give me a glass of water. Just reduce it, and that I can stare the rest of my life and just trying to capture that. Don't need a lake, just need that glass of water on the table in its shadow.
Yeah, he's fantastic, isn't he? And those are so strong. I love the comment he once made about one of the inspirations for those walking men was a vision that he had of a friend of his who was kind of disappearing down the road, and as she disappeared, she became so much a shadow of herself. And I thought that was, again, one of those keen observations that artists make out of just the most basic elements of their experience, and then somehow, bringing that into the pool of all these other ideas and experiences of seeing to create what they did. But just that idea of observation.
Beautiful way to wrap up, because when we think about the walking, what it means, Giacometti also very similarly said, I do not sculpt the person walking, I sculpt their shadow.
Yeah.
Just really, really incredible idea. Even something more fleeting than walking is the shadow of a man walking.
Perfect. And I do want to remind folks too, because nobody's posted one yet, to win the contest, to win another set of paper, we need you to post an image of your favorite painting or sculpture or work of art of the theme walking. And I'm excited to see what people come up with, especially now that they've been inspired by you, Zhenya. And there are so many great images to choose from. And I'm thankful for your editing down to some of these real poignant moments, and especially that history in the beginning. I think that's very helpful. The evolution of the figure through the history of art and that kind of coming forward, that was really brilliant, a way to begin the conversation. Somebody posted a comment about maybe another one in line would be Rodin's The Walking Man, kind of another one to put after.
Yes, yes. There's
But,
much that I edited out, but my dream, I was so inspired that we do maybe sometimes talk to a museum and curate an exhibition. This would be a great exhibition
yeah.
and one that never existed before. And we can even talk about the routes the artists took. There's a lot of artists who sketched during the walks, and you
Right.
could trace how they walked and where they went on walks. It's endless subject, and I hope you're inspired. And I hope you'll never think about moving your feet the same way again.
Or even contemporary artists who walking is their art, right?
Yes.
Environmental landscape artists. So another elevation
It
of
goes
that idea.
on. It goes on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Zhenya. As always, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll be monitoring Facebook over the next day or so to choose another winner. Congrats again to Steve O'Brien for winning last time. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Zhenya. Fantastic as always.
Thank you, Jeff.
And we'll see you in August. August for number 10. For number 10. I'm excited. I'm excited. All right. Take care, everybody. All the best.